On to black, we have Carrier Thrall, who is also a little suspect. It's a 2-mana 2/1. When he dies, you get a Scion token into play. It's a dude, 2 power on 2 mana. Not great, but I mean fair. And when he dies, you get a 1/1. Why is he in here? Well, I mean, he replaces himself. It's nothing super exciting, but I mean, we're dealing with black creatures here, so nothing. It's not going to be streamers and balloons, people. This guy, to me, is really basic. I don't know if he's worth playing, but he's worth considering. I'd like to see someone try him out, because worst case scenario, you clamp him, get something else to clamp. Or you play him in that, like, black-green, like, you don't care if your things die.
Yeah, or you could run him in, like, Mardu, like Alex Stacey's list, like the Aristocrats.
Yeah, that's true. Like, he does have a trigger for when he dies, and that trigger brings in something else that can trigger other things that have if something dies. So I mean, he has interactions, which is why I think I'm including him. I don't think he's a trap. I just think he's incredibly niche.
Yeah, incredibly niche and possibly underwhelming.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly underwhelming, possibly unplayable if you ask me.
Like you said, I think this card goes in either of those lists, and I'd like to see how it performs in those. I'm willing to say that it probably is maybe not the greatest in those lists. I don't know. Maybe. Try it. Carrier Thrall. Give it a shot.
Let's see if it can carry somebody to a positive record. But here's an actual really good card. We have Drana, Liberator of Malakir.
This card's nuts.
Yeah, this card's insane. 1 double black, 2/3. It's a legendary vampire ally.
Legendary vampire allies.
Flying and first strike. When Drana deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Baby, that's first strike, like, combat math, just teaching all the newer players, like, how shit works while simultaneously giving them thumbs up for playing a bunch of creatures. Like, on curve, this thing is just scary as fuck. Right?
I don't understand why this card... Okay, so we had just talked about the Awaken mechanic, and the Awaken mechanic is this thing where they don't have... they give their lands haste that already probably have haste if they're tapping correctly, and then they print this card, which is like, this card deals first strike damage, all the creatures that had attacked with it on the same attacking turn get that bonus. So it's like... Yes, they're doing the Awaken thing, but then dumbing it down, and then they're doing something like this, which isn't necessarily the most complex mechanic, but like is way more complicated than the Awaken thing. So, what are they doing?
There are certain applications for that ability, right? Like, if it had just a Piana or a Soltari Champion, like, when it attacks, put a counter on everything, like, that would be too good. The first strike makes it interesting that, like, it can get blown out before they get the counter on it, like you can lightning bolt it or whatever. To me, it's an elegant, a little complicated for somebody that is not, like, first strike still just fucks with, like, even the most experienced players, and I don't know why. It's like the most simple abilities, first strike and trample, like, still, when I was actively judging, those were what I got a lot of calls on. Like, okay, he first strikes here, like, how does combat work again? Like, when can I do things in the combat step?
So I was talking to Nelson about this card, or maybe I was overhearing what Nelson was talking about the other day, and Nelson was saying, this card is great, I have a feeling this card is great in Sui Black aggro. And so part of the reason why that's the case is because it provides a Bad Moon effect without you actually having to run Bad Moon.
Yeah.
So you don't want to run Bad Moon in those lists because literally every card that isn't a pump spell or some sort of combat trick or equipment or something like that is going to be a creature. So this creature is functionally a 3-mana 2/3 with evasion, with first strike, and Bad Moon. It Bad Moons your dudes for 3 mana. Yeah, I think this card is going to be like an auto-include in Sui Black aggro, like the moment it comes out.
An aggressive black aggro list, definitely.
Oh yeah.
It's also worth noting that, like, aside from the first strike interacting with its ability, just like the fact that this trade, or it doesn't even trade, the fact that this knocks Vendilion Clicks out of the sky, has this, like, stare off with Trigon Predator. I mean, the click is the biggest thing. Like, that's the most popular flyer, right? Like, being able to crack him down without that 3 power getting put to good use, like, that's pretty insane. This card, I mean, this card's great. Just play this in aggressive black decks, folks.
I'm stoked that they reprinted Drana as well from a standpoint.
I kind of like that they're doing this with a lot of cards where when they revisit things, or if they make nods to other planes or past planes or whatever, or if somebody planeswalks, they've made them more playable. They've lowered the CMC and made the cards just overall stronger, or they may have like increased it but made the value that you get a hell of a lot better.
Look at that headgear.
I'm squinting to try. Oh Jesus, that just looks. How do you have first strike when you have that much fucking shit on your head?
I dig this card.
Yeah, but onto some painful truths, Adam. If you're playing black, you're going to have to pay a lot of life to draw your cards. But with painful truths, you can pay 2 colorless and a black. With Converge, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of colors spent to pay this. Sometimes it's just a 3-mana Sign in Blood, and that's not the greatest, but sometimes you need that. But other times it's pay 3, draw 3, lose 3. It's Ambition's cost that costs 1 less mana, and I think we're overdue for that kind of effect.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited for this card. For 3 mana in black draws, you can pay half your life, which I'm willing to do, man. I'll pay half my life to draw 4 cards. But I'm also super willing to play 3 mana CMC to draw 3 cards. And losing 3 life is like whatever. But yeah, I think this card is insanely nuts. I want to see this in white, green, black. And I think this card will have a place for sure.
I can see this card getting played in something like a Poxless that's splashing for other colors. Like maybe, I mean, it's a little expensive, but I can see it there. Like even Mardu. You're drawing a lot of cards for equivalent mana, which again, you don't get to do that often. And the drawback, well, it isn't actually a drawback. We've covered this. But good card, solid card. It's been out for a while, so people have talked about it for, a good length of time.
I would slide this into... I could be wrong on this one, and this card could be potentially less playable, but I think I would hard slam this into the play this card for sure.
I think this card is in the put me in coach status, in the same way that cards like Night's Whisper or Sign in Blood are, just because the number of decks that you can play it in are a bit limited, because you don't necessarily want to play these cards in blue decks or decks with access to blue.
Yeah, you draw cards anyway. Yeah.
But in the decks without that, I mean, these cards are great, right? Or at least if they're aggressive, they're great.
And this is also, I think, just straight up better than Skeletal Scrying.
Skeletal Scrying can pull off a nice Necropotence impression occasionally, but nowadays people are exiling cards from their graveyard for more important cards, right? Even in black, you're casting Tasigur or Gurmag Angler or something huge.
But yeah, the truth about this card is that we've spent too much time on it.
Oh, that was painful. I'm going to retreat to Hagra, but then I have to pass it off to you, Adam, because this is your neck of the woods. Talk about this card.
Okay, cool. I'm actually really excited about this card. So this is 2 colorless, 1 black. It's an enchantment. It has the landfall mechanic. So whenever land enters the battlefield, you're going to choose one of these. The modes are target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. And then the second mode is each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I think at first glance, this card seems like massively underwhelming, and then the more you think about it, or at least the more I've thought about this card, I actually am so okay with this card. And the fact that it's an uncommon is really appealing to me, because it's just going to be one there's going to be tons of. I like this card, or I guess what I'm going to immediately place this card into is my own Pox list. And the reason why is because it buffs your flyers. It can make immeasurable trades with huge things with that Death Touch mechanic. And then there's the opportunity where you just literally win the game by playing lands, which in a top deck war, which is how Pox decks functions, that's awesome. That's so good. You get to just play lands and win the game. And your opponent sits there doing nothing.
So to throw down some specifics, giving creatures, the deck itself doesn't play many creatures, but giving something like Nether Spirit, which is a creature that continuously returns itself to play, being able to give it Death Touch so that it trades with everything as opposed to just chump blocking or occasionally trading, that's fantastic. Giving your Bitter Blossom tokens, your Lingering Souls tokens, like Garruk Relentless tokens, Sorin tokens, making those bigger actually lets you put out a reasonable clock. And again, Death Touch with Snap lands so that you can actually trade with bigger threats. And I touch on Snaplands because the second ability, them losing life, well, you're going to have access to cards like Life from the Loam, or in a top deck war, as you said, if you're drawing lands, you're going to be playing them out. Like, whatever you draw, you're usually just going to be playing them. Very few cards are reactive, unless they're like a removal spell, and then you just have to make some sacrifices in deck construction. You have sources to constantly get these triggering, and both of the abilities are super relevant. Like, being able to actually put a clock on your opponent for a deck like that is fantastic. And gaining life back, which is something that Pox, they usually pay a lot of life, either drawing cards with cards like Painful Truths or losing life to Bitter Blossom. They lose some life or two, but this helps gain it back. You don't lose the game for being at 1 life. And with effects like this here and there, you can hopefully survive the aggro matchup.
Sort of moving away from Pox and moving into the other realms of where this card is playable, I would say that this card is playable because of its competitive CMC. It's ideal in a Pox list because of its CMC, but it's also competitive in other lists because of, once again, the effects it gives are quite strong. Maybe not as versatile, but still really relevant.
I'm more in the camp of shove it in Pox until it works kind of category. I don't know how strong this would be in other lists, but I mean the abilities that it gives are certainly relevant. The problem is that it doesn't do anything when it comes into play unless you have another land, and I think Pox is all right with that because that's a recurring theme, and usually there won't be that much resistance because hopefully you've poxed, not literally, but you know what the term poxed means by now. And if you don't, have fun fighting Adam at your local Highlander tournament.
Yeah.
Let's go on to a different path. A little more ruinous path. This is the Awaken card that you have expressed quite a lot of interest in, and that I think is probably the most playable out of all of them. So, Ruinous Path, 1 black, sorcery, destroy a creature or a planeswalker, awaken for 4 when you pay 7 mana. So it's a Hero's Downfall at sorcery speed, and then it has Awaken 4. I mean, I'll play Hero's Downfall.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of times the decks that want that card, they'll play it at sorcery speed.
I was going to say, that card is, I think, played more often at sorcery speed, especially when it versus planeswalkers.
Yeah, you can try to get fancy and be like, haha, I know they have the counterspell, so I'll catch them on their upkeep. And there are so many times where people, there is the mindset that they have, I have to do this at the last possible point in time to get the maximum value. And that's true for a lot of situations, but in Highlander, you can get blown out so quickly by that.
I agree. There is definitely a timing and a place for things. I think Ruinous Path at first glance doesn't feel very good. And I think that's wrong. I think this card is actually deceptively strong. Awaken 4 is super relevant. That card does not die to burn. I'm comfortable paying 3 mana for destroying a creature or a planeswalker. Sorcery speed's meh, but I think destroying a planeswalker or a creature, having that versatility for 3 mana is alright. And then I think ideal scenario is late game, this is just get a 4/4. Which could be game-winning.
Yeah, card's great, and definitely helps you on your path to victory.
You're so sick.
Thank you. I'm reading Wasteland Strangler.
Oh!
One of the few processor cards. So, I mean, this isn't a mechanic, but it's something that you'll see if you look at the Battle for Zendikar set.
Yeah.
So these cards require you to return a card in your opponent's exile zone to their graveyard for an effect. And I feel like this is one of the only playable ones. So Wasteland Strangler, 2 colorless and a black, Ancient Tomb mana, 3 power, 2 toughness, it's got 3 power, 3 mana, great. Devoid, that doesn't fucking matter. When the Strangler ETBs, if you put a card from their exile into their graveyard, you can give target creature -3/-3. So it effectively kills a creature. And it only costs 3 mana, and it has 3 power, and you're in black, so you might be on Deathrite Shaman, or you might be on something else that exiles cards from their hands, yada yada yada. And this guy is actually cheap, his effect is relevant, he's in the colors to actually get it going on. I really like this card.
Wasteland Strangler, now in a Highlander deck featuring Oubliette. I'm joking. I think you're right. I think this card actually, at first glance, I hate all the Eldrazi cards in this deck, in this set, but I'm actually warming up to this one. I like the fact you can just move something out of Oblivion Ring and put it in the graveyard and just nuke one of their dudes.
Yeah, it doesn't matter half the time, right?
Nah, and you're right. Like, you've got your Deathrite Shamans to slide things. It's quite possible you're playing with this with green, so you could be running like Skoos, in which case this card looks great with Skoos. It's also just neatly aligned in that regard. Skoos 2, this 3. It's another one of those Ancient Tomb cards. The power is equivalent. It's P and T is equal to its CMC.
Hell yeah.
I think this card is niche to playable.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Niche in that, like, I feel like I'm more excited about this card than I should be, just because it's like, oh my god, it's a processor that's playable. Maybe I'm a little off on how good it is, but I still think it's quite good.
Yeah, no, totally.
Finally, the last black card, Zulaport Cutthroat. I'm going to be really quick on this, because you've probably seen a card exactly like this. So, it's a human rogue ally, so turn on that Prowl activation, get that ally trigger going. That's all I got. No, it's a 1/1, and when him or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses one life, and you gain 1 life. So it's a Blood Artist that has a power.
It's a Blood Artist that also doesn't affect their board. So it has to be your creatures.
Yeah, but usually in Blood Artist decks, like I'm talking about playing it alongside the Aristocrats. And usually that's where you're going to be taking advantage of it. You don't get to, cheese off on what they're doing, which is a little unfortunate. But having 1 power, being able to clock in, having him trigger off of himself, and obviously his ability being there for everything that you're doing, counting towards all your tokens too. Goblin Bombardment with this guy still works. I like this guy. If you're playing the Zombardment decks or the Aristocrat decks, pick up yourself a copy of this, dude.
I think this card's very real in Zombardment, Aristocrats or whatever. Aristocrats. There we go.
The Aristocrats. It's a family act.
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
And that's black, so we're moving on to red with a card that I think you folks already know I'm gonna fucking hate. Because guess what? It's a Phoenix, and it sucks. 4 mana 3/3, flying haste. Akoum Firebird attacks each turn if able. And it has landfall. It's a Juggernaut, but Juggernaut's actually cool.
Yeah.
This card has landfall. When a land ETBs, you can pay 6 to return it to play. And that's fine and dandy like nuts and candy.
Ugh.
But this card costs 4 mana, 3 power, attacks each turn if able.
Ugh.
I hate this card. This is a trap. I just want everybody to know this is a trap. I hate Phoenix cards. I think only Chandra's Phoenix and
it's actually just Chandra's Phoenix.
I kind of warmed up to, what's his name, Flamewake Phoenix, but not really. Just Chandra's Phoenix. This card is hot doo-doo.
I also want to state that I think this card is really poorly designed. I don't like the attacks each turn if able. It already has a drawback of having lower power than its CMC. And then to top that all off, you have this absurd 6 mana landfall cost that is what deck does this go in? The answer is it doesn't go in any deck. You don't want to be playing this in Big Red, and Big Red's the only thing that can take advantage of its 6 CMC garbage mode. So I actually really agree. I feel very strongly that this card is actually awful.
There's currently a thread going on the Victoria Magic page, maybe not the Highlander page, that is about Phoenixes, and it's talking about how much the general populace loves them. But remember, the general populace of Magic, there are a lot of bad players out there. None of you, of course, because you're Highlander players and you're smart individuals. But I really dislike Phoenixes because there's so little room for exploratory design, and the design around these cards has a predetermined outcome already. It has to bring the Phoenix back. And then, at the same time, they always take up the Mythic slot, because if these were at Rare, in Limited, they would fuck around like the draft, right?
Yeah.
So they take up a mythic, they suck, they always do the same thing, they try to make them cool, like Ash Cloud Phoenix that came out in that came out in Cons, not Highlander playable, but it at least opened up the design space for what they're doing. And I really think that's only because they had Morph available. This just feels awful to me. I would hate to open this in a pack.
I'm definitely not returning this card from the ashes.
Oh.
But I might burn it.
Yeah, I might set it on fire. Akum Stonewalker. 2 mana 2/1, landfall. When a land ETBs under your control, you may pay 3. If you do, put a 3/1 red elemental token into play with trample and haste, and then exile that token at the beginning of your end step. So you get like a spark elemental when you have landfall if you pay 3. The downside to this guy is that he's a 2-drop in red, and that's really competitive. Like, that's hyper-competitive slot at this point. Like, when we did our Magic Origins review, and I saw Abbot of Carol Keep, I was like, this slot is really competitive. I don't know if this guy gets there. And I think, now that I've seen that card in action, that the Abbot sees play, but then that means he's kicking something else out. And we're getting a bunch of burn spells that are cool, like as Magic progresses, and we're getting all these creatures. And this guy's ability is great, because he comes down on turn 2, and on turn 3, when you play your 3rd land, you get the trigger, you can pay 3, and you get a 3/1. So you're getting pressure without actually doing anything except for a basic game action and using your mana for the turn. Mm-hmm. And you get this elemental. And then later in the game, if you're just drawing nothing, it's still gas. So I really like this card, but this is... I'm going to say this every single set. Like, when a new red 2-drop comes out, I'll be like, but this is fighting for such a competitive slot. But realistically, this guy's fighting for such a competitive slot.
Also, I want to say earlier, too, with that Spark Elemental comment, man, I mean, yeah, it's technically an elemental, but, I mean, if we're really talking about when this effect first appeared, I'm going to have to shift our audience's view to, of course, our good friend Balduvian Dead from Alliances, because that's really where this card
The Dead
came
didn't
from.
have haste, but it had 3/1. We're trying to tap into the youth here, Adam.
It's a 3/1 with haste. It's the only difference is that it's a Graveborn, and it had the same CMC and everything to put it into play. The fact of the matter is, Akum Stonewalker is magic harkening back to the good old days of Balduvian Dead from Alliances.
You know, we can sit here and talk about Balduvian Dead all we want, but we're not going to get anywhere. We need to talk about this Stonewaker, who I think I've been calling Stonewalker the entire time. I'm not sure. I'll have to check the tape.
I agree that this card is good, and I think that your assessment of it was accurate. I think that this is sort of like a card that is actually better on late game, but it also has some modes early, and it just feels like it fits really nicely. I would even say that the whole 2 CMC argument of it being competitively in that slot, like, I think this is one of the more competitive cards for that slot.
Yeah, I mean, late game, he does work. Early game, he still curves out nicely. He's got a lot going for him. I want to see my boy do work. Red players, test them out, please.
Stonework?
Moving on. Oh, great. We just left from a shitty pun to a card that I'm only including in here because I want to rage on camera. We have Dragon Master Outcast. And I'm not going to talk about why you should play this in Highlander, because you fucking shouldn't. I'm talking about that this card is a reprint. We've already seen this. We saw this in Worldwake, and it was a mythic then, and it's a mythic now. And I understand why it's a mythic, because having this card at rare, much like the Akum Firebird, or whatever the hell it's called, would kind of run amok. But at mythic, in your big set, this is what you're bringing back? Like, it's a neat effect, but this guy was already readily available. He never saw standard play. He never saw, like, modern play or legacy. He certainly didn't see play in Highlander. I can only think of Commander. And for Commander players, this card is only like $8. It was like $9 or $10 before it was spoiled, and then it was spoiled again and it went down. And even then, like, people already have this card, so it's not hard to find. So what the fuck, Wizards? I'm not a red player, but like, throw them a bone in the mythic slot at least.
I totally agree. I think this card is a really big mistake. From a standpoint of, like, creating a card that would be new and refreshing. And I'm going to look at it from its mythic perspective too. The mythic perspective is that a mythic card should have a functionally like really interesting and new effect. And like 5/5 dragons, man, I don't know. I'm not feeling it. I don't think that's new. I don't like the fact that it's on the upkeep. Like, I just don't like this card. This to me is a disappointment as a mythic because it doesn't create any new design space. And it's also, like you said, just a huge like waste of time and money. And like no one wants to see this.
Yeah, it was disappointing before and it's disappointing again. I'm getting bummed out. Let's move on to Molten Nursery. 3 mana. When you cast a colorless spell, the nursery deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This is where I start to actually brew with eggs. Because when we were talking about alternate win cons, this is where I think, maybe, just maybe, we can play this. It's kind of in that Grafter Aether Grid, or whatever it was called from Magic Origins area.
Girafer Aether Grid, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that card, they're both, maybe they're just both awful. Like, I don't like the Aether Grid. I know some people have mentioned that, like, there might be some work for it, but I don't like that card. For Molten Nursery, this is just Kozilek Sentinel all over again. But this is actually a card where, in eggs, the fact that it pings off creatures, so problem creatures for eggs like Thalia, Gaddock Teague, even Aethersworn Canonist seems like it wouldn't be a big deal, but it can be a big deal. Mm-hmm. Being able to ping off those dudes, or like Scavenging Ooze or whatever, like, I think this card has potential. It might just be a trap. And I'm sorry if you lose games because of it. But being able to, ping out their things and then kind of go off, this gives an opening for a Grape Shot version of eggs, as opposed to the Open the Vaults, Pyrite Spellbomb, or Codex Shredder combo version of eggs. And it's worth noting that it's an enchantment, so you can get it back with Open the Vaults.
I like this card. So there's been a lot of alternative win con conversation in regards to eggs that isn't like storming your opponent out or something like that, or like, getting them with the stone. I always forget what it's called, but the red stone. Anyway, the point is, like, Molten Nursery provides like an alternative win con, like, so previously, like, you have cards like Alter the Brood, which like mill your opponent out, but Molten Nursery is like far more lethal and takes far less artifacts to actually rev up. And it's possible that you're just able to cast this turn 1 with a Black Lotus, right? And then from there, you just playing your spells naturally out as if you would normally wins you the game, even if you're not able to like win the game, right? And I mean, Black Lotus in the bin turn 1 is super relevant, right? Like you're that's where you want that card, either in your hand or in the bin, right? I don't know. I think Molten Nursery's kind of decent, and it only goes in that deck for sure.
Warning: this card may be a trap.
Yeah, I'm willing to admit it's maybe a trap too.
Just be cautious with it.
Yeah, brew with this.
Radiant Flames. This card knows what it wants to do and does what it does. 2 in a red, Converge. Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast Radiant Flames. So it's a 3 mana, deals 3 damage to each creature. It's like Fire Spout.
It's Fire Spout.
Yeah, there are a lot of Pyroclasms that people like to run, but the 3 damage to each creature in decks that are not mono red or like red with a splash of another color, like, they cost double red or like sometimes triple red, and they also like have conditions, like they might deal damage to you too, or like Anger of the Gods or whatever. But I like this card in that it lets you, there are instances where you can also just control what kind of mana you're spending on this. So if you only need it for 2 and you have like a Seagate Oracle in play or something, then you only have it for 2. And then you get to keep your dude against the aggro deck. But mostly it's just an easier to cast Pyroclasm at 3.
Can I mention, too, that I think this is better Fire Spout mana than Fire Spout? Green doesn't want to play Pyroclasm.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. If you want to hit flyers, you need green with Fire Spout, and then you're kind of locked into, well...
Playing green.
I guess
what are you going to do, put elves in your list? Nah. Yeah, this card
feels like a Grixis card or like a blue-white-red kind of thing. I mean, maybe Rug, too, but it's just another option. I like options.
I do too. I think this card is actually situationally could be quite a lot stronger than Fire Spout. I just would argue that Fire Spout doesn't see any play in Highlander, so maybe take that with a grain of salt when you review this card.
Beast Color Savant, bringing us into green. We have a 2-mana 1/1 with haste that taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool and spend this only to cast creature spells. This card, folks, is real fucking bad.
This card sucks. It's a super big trap. Like, why would you need to... You just... Okay, the haste on turn 2, didn't you just... And then you played this, but then you don't have any mana left. Like, what are you going to play, another elf after this? Come on.
Like, think of the kind of decks where you might want this. Cradle Hoof comes to mind.
Ugh.
I would never fucking play this in a Cradle Hoof list. I mean, it's kind of cute because it has that Wall Roots thing, but, like... It's not as you don't play the use this only for creature spells unless you're like heavily geared against combo decks and you want to zip zop zoobity bop them before they are able to combo off against you. But this guy doesn't do that. This guy is just like, hey guys, how's it going? Here's another Arbor Elf maybe, and if not, he cracks in.
He's like, hey man, check out these 6-pack abs, man. And here's my friend Lotus Cobra. And he's like, Lotus Cobra's like, no, get out. No, like, leave this guy. He's a fucking goon, right? And Lotus Cobra's like, I'm out of here, man. Peace. Like on the side, you know.
Cobra, man, I need to make a good impression. I need your help. Can you just like come with me while I introduce myself? And he's like, oh, I really don't want to, but this guy saw me doing things I really shouldn't have been doing, and he's marrying my sister.
Raw fellow shows up, he's like, yo, Lotus Cobra, who the fuck's this guy, man?
Hey, I'm an elf too.
Hey, I'm an elf guy. Yeah, this card's awful.
Oh, fuck him. Blister Pod. 1 green mana for a 1/1. Devoid, but that doesn't matter. When he dies, put a 1/1 Scion token into play. It's a 1/1 for 1. Then when he dies, you get a better 1/1 that sacrifices to add mana. Maybe this guy sees play in like black-green or like junk deck that's looking to abuse dying triggers. Maybe there's a Rally the Ancestors or like a Mortal Servitude deck that could be played in Highlander. If you sacrifice him, he does something, and then the thing that he does can also be sacrificed. Yeah. I like him. I like him better than I should. He's not exciting. He is literally the like basic drone card of the set. He's the like, this is a 1 mana thing that makes a 1 dude, right? Or like there might be a 2 mana guy that makes a dude, but we've skipped him because he would cost 2 mana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this one's kind of, I don't know, probably not playable, to be honest.
Yeah, you know what? I'm willing to side with you, but out of all these kind of cards, he's probably... I mean, they're not very good. There's the flying one off Ancient Tomb, but...
I can see your point, though. His CMC makes his not playability, like, kind of almost enticing.
Yeah, so maybe he's a trap of sorts.
Yeah.
Greenwarden of Murasa. 6 mana, 5/4 elemental. When he ETBs, you may return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, Eternal Witness. When he dies, you can exile it. If you do, return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, another Eternal Witness. So, 2 Eternal Witnesses, albeit at different times, but if you add Eternal Witness to Eternal Witness, Adam, that's quad green and you only get a 4/2. This is double green and you get a 5/4.
Yeah, you're getting more bang for your buck, quite literally.
This is a guy that I really want to see in action before giving like a solid, like whether or not to play him. He's certainly one that I will be testing out in Cradle Hoof. Or even playing him in like black-green the Rock might be fine. Like, Eternal Witness effects are super good when they're attached to bodies.
Yeah, maybe just cast this guy, and he's a 5/4, so he's definitely has some strength to him. Maybe just Thoughtseize your opponent, because you cast Thoughtseize on turn 1 and you do it again. Or maybe you get back, I don't know, like Recurring Nightmare.
He's big, you know? Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can't go off with him because he's got to exile himself to do the second ability. I mean, you still can. Like, you can still do what you would do with Eternal Witness.
Well, that's not really what my point was, though. Like, you just get back a Recurring Nightmare because you're a green blacklist, and Recurring Nightmare feels good to cast.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were going with...
No, I understand that, like, you have to exile them, so you're not getting any value out of that, but, like, you've got a 5/4 that's giving you your Recurring Nightmare back, and then you've got some sort of goofy goober in the bin, so you just Recurring Nightmare one of those guys back. Or maybe when this guy dies, you recur him, and then you get the first trigger, you know?
I mean, let's be honest, though. If you're Recurring Nightmares in your graveyard, you fucked up some way. Because, like, that card is designed not ever get touched. Like, that card is infuriating. But if it does, it's nice to have something to get it back.
I like this guy. I think he's playable. I don't know. I kind of with you. I kind of want to see it because I'm not sure what shell runs it. But both effects are strong.
He's a shitload of value on a big enough body, and if they Wrath a God, well, he gives you a chance to get back something they might have wrathed.
Totally.
Yeah, no. Fan of this card, but I want to see it in action. Jaddi Offshoot, or Jaddi Offshoot. 1 green for a 0/3 defender. When a land ETBs, you gain 1 life. Amulet Bloom combo. That's where I'd want to play this guy. Because infinite landfall triggers, this is a guy that for 1 mana, you can go off with the refuge, the blue refuge, that gains you infinite life. It can get you fast bonding, so you're not dying to your own fast bond, so you can strip them out of the game, or you can just fetch out all the lands from your deck. And
eat your heart out 2/1s.
Yeah, and having 3 toughness, like, he's really good against aggro, obviously, for that deck. And if you're comboing off with a deck like that has a lot of ways to get its pieces back, so you're not too worried about something getting countered by a control list. But against the aggro deck, giving yourself time to set up, it's quite nice. And the most important thing, obviously, is that he costs 1 mana. And a lot of your other combo pieces, Vast Bond, Amulet of Vigor, if you're playing an Altar of the Brood variant, or like Hedron Crab if you're Surge, then you can Dizzy Spell for it, or you can Wargate for it super cheap. Like, getting this card is super easy, it helps against the aggro matchup, it helps combo off, it seems really dorky, and don't get me wrong, it is, but I think it's kind of just what you need, right? It's one of those pieces, because you don't want to run Life Gift. You'll run Corsair Crewfix. You'll run Grazing Gladeheart. You won't be too happy about it, but who knows. And then you got this dude.
I like this guy too, because he's slow. He wants to play slow Magic, and I appreciate slow Magic.
You enjoy Magic that is grueling and just tiring. And speaking of tiring, let's move on, because we are many hours into this already. Scythe Leopard. 1 green for a 1/1 landfall. When a land ETBs, he gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Step links, bless his heart, not the best in Highlander, because he doesn't have any power. But Scythe Leopard, I mean, he cracks in for 3 on turn 2 if you have a snap land. He can crack in for 3 again, maybe. If you're playing him in like mono green Stompy or like a green X list with Quirion Ranger and Scrib Ranger, you can start getting a little feisty, making sure he's a 2/2. For those decks, if after your 1-drop has dealt like 6 damage or like 5 damage, aren't you sated? Are you not entertained? Like,
yeah, you're like way ahead if your Scythe Leopard does 3 damage turn 2, I think.
I don't think this is the first card that people will jump to when they're looking for 1-drops, but he has potential to crack for more than what other guys would, which I think is what puts him a bit ahead of others.
Yeah, I think I like this card conditionally. I think it has niche playability, but I'm willing to admit that this probably might just get into a lot of lists as well.
I'm going to leave this to Spencer to actually decide whether or not it's playable or not. I don't trust that man for a lot of things.
But Scythe Leopard is one of them.
Yeah, being respectable, not one of them. But Scythe Leopard, I'll trust him with that. Undergrowth Champion. If damage would be dealt to Undergrowth Champion while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage and remove a +1/+1 counter from him. Landfall. When a land ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on him. Ta-da!
Can I cover this one? I hate this card.
I don't think he's super good, but in Stompy or in like green-white aggro, like
I'm willing to be wrong on this, but I think this card is like damn near unplayable.
I think he's niche. Like there are plenty of other cards at 3 that are really good, and why would you want to play this guy? Well, if you're restricted by your colors, so if you're mono green, or if you're in a color in a situation like green blue aggressive, like the green blue like Manowar tap out deck that was popular in Europe for a while, maybe this guy pops in. I mean, he's no Serendipity, but the landfall thing is kind of neat. Having him stick around is kind of interesting. He still just dies to Doom Blades and Path to Exiles, and there's, well, not much that survives those. But there's a place, time and place for this guy. It's not exciting.
Can we just like run out the scenario though? Because here's the scenario I'm seeing with Undergrowth Champion. The scenario that would happen time and time again and be sorely depressing. Okay, you're running green, so you're probably casting this guy turn 2. Maybe you're casting it turn 3. That would suck for you, but more likely turn 2. So turn 2, you cast your Undergrowth Champion. And you're like, nice, I got this Undergrowth Champion here. Sweet, okay. And then turn 3 comes down, and you're like, oh, cool, I get to play a land this turn because it's my 3rd turn of the game. So turn 3, you play a land. Your Undergrowth Champion is now a 3/3. And your Undergrowth Champion, you swing with your Undergrowth Champion, and you do 3 damage for the 3 CMC you paid on your Undergrowth Champion. And they're like, oh, I'd like to block my Undergrowth Champion. And then they block it with their like 1/1 or whatever the hell they block it with. And then it removes a counter, and your Undergrowth Champion is back to being a 2/2. Like, is it just me, or is this like, has the whole world gone crazy? And that just sounds terrible to me.
Oh, it's not exciting. But
like, that sounds really bad.
If they're trading their 1/1 on turn 3, like, I can't think of many 1/1s that people would really want to give up. Like, if they're trading a Mana Dork, well, then good for them. If you're against an aggro deck and they're on the defense, well, then you're already winning that out. And they might use 2 cards to deal with it. Like, if he's eating up their creatures, then that's a net positive. Like, it sucks that his counter's removed, but you're in green, you can get it back. You can have Quirion Ranger shenanigans, or you can have a Snapland at the ready. My, like, bad scenario for him is you play him, and then he just eats a bolt. Or you wait until turn 3, and you play him off like a bird, and then you play your land for the turn, and then trigger on the stack, they kill it. So you need like a Snapland. Like, again, this guy's not super exciting, not super strong, but in the decks where you're like, my creature is probably going to die anyways by a removal spell, but they're not going to die in combat. So stuff like Loxodon Smiter or Knight of the Reliquary, this dude, Leatherback Baloth. Like, if you're on the boring old Magic, like, I think this guy gets in. If you're not, sure, well, then you're probably enjoying life more than others. And but that's a different story.
There's an argument that can be made towards like him eating up Death Touch, all right.
Yeah.
I would say that you're probably sliding this in the niche category. I'm still gonna slide this in. I don't think this is playable, but we'll see. We'll see.
Tough but fair. Woodland Wanderer, 4-mana 2/2, Vigilance, Trample, and then Converge. It gets +1/+1 counters, whatever you paid it. So at its biggest in like a 4-color zoo deck or like Dark Bant,
6/6,
you get a 6/6 Vigilance Trample. The 4-drop slot is hyper competitive, again, like for everything, because you got your Planeswalkers, you got Armageddons, you got Thrun, Hero of Bladehold, Siege Rhino. And I don't have enough experience to know whether or not this guy is Gucci in those lists, but a 4-mana 6/6 Vigilance Trample is huge. It still dies to your Garden Variety removal spell of like Doomblade or Swords, but everything does. But it's a 6/6 for 4-mana Vigilance Trample. He's dumb, he's stupid, he's just an idiot, that's all he is, but he's a big idiot, Adam.
I think that this guy is more likely than not going to be involved in 3-color lists, in which case he's a 5/5 with Vigilance and Trample, which I would argue is kind of like the baseline for, basically looking at this guy and determining whether or not he's good. I think the 6/6 argument is fair. I mean, this guy can go in a 4-color list. I'm not saying he can't. I think that this is probably most likely going in green, black, white, or like maybe green, red, white, or something like that. In which case he's a 5/5 with Vigilance and Trample for 4. Is a 5/5 with Vigilance and Trample for 4 good enough?
I don't know how to answer that question.
It's so hard, because he's very vanilla-y, isn't he?
Yeah.
Like,
I'd like to be back in the days of Blastoderms, but are we? I don't think we are. But, like, Trample is huge, and Vigilance is huge, right? Like, if he connects, he's going to get through damage, and then he's going to prevent them from attacking.
Yeah, he eats whatever they're attacking with the next turn.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a chance that they do some funny stuff with those counters, in which case he gets a bit smaller.
Calling for Vampire Hexmage?
yeah, why not? So, I mean, I've seen sillier plays. I think a 4-mana 5/5 with Vigilance and Trample is good enough for Highlander. I would slide this in niche.
Yeah, I'm going to say niche too.
Thank you for watching, and if you like that, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more hidden gems, set reviews, deck techs, and much more. Also be sure to follow our Canadian Highlander Facebook page, and check out our newly updated website at canadianhighlander.wordpress.com. Links for our various podcasts will also be included in the description below. Thanks again, and feel free to leave any questions, comments, or concerns, and one of the council members will be sure to answer as best as they can. And remember folks, there can be only one.